The ancient planetary defense grid over Solara-Prime was dying. High above the golden atmospheric clouds of the Lumina homeworld, the planetary energy shield, a translucent, shimmering dome of hardened plasma that had protected 3 billion souls for 12 millennia, was flickering erratically. Deep crimson ripples cascaded across its burning surface with every salvo from the dreadnoughts in orbit. Outside the failing barrier, space was choked with 3,000 heavily armored warships belonging to the Ravager Horde, a nomadic, hyper-violent warmongering species that had spent the last 8 months burning every Lumina outpost, trade corridor, and colony sector down to glowing ash. Inside the planetary high command spire on Solara-Prime, Supreme Matriarch Vanya stood before a broad holographic tactical array. Her 4 crystalline ears drooped low against her head, her luminescent skin dulled to a pale, terrified gray. Around her, military advisors scrambled in blind, absolute desperation. Consoles beeped with incessant proximity alarms, hull failure warnings, and catastrophic energy losses. On the main tactical screen, the Lumina defense fleet, once a proud force of 1,200 sleek, solar-sailed frigates, had been reduced to less than 40 heavily damaged picket ships. They drifted in low orbit like broken glass, firing desperate, underpowered plasma bursts at an enemy that outnumbered them 100 to 1. Shield integrity is down to 6%. The chief defense engineer wept, his hands shaking over the glowing interface. Generator banks 4 through 7 in the polar continent have gone critical. Their heavy kinetic batteries are hitting the mantle directly. High Matriarch. The shield will collapse entirely in less than 48 standard hours. Vanya closed her eyes, swallowing the bitter taste of total defeat. The broadcast relays? Have we reached our allies on the Galactic Council? We have sent priority distress signals on all diplomatic channels. High Matriarch. The communications officer replied, his voice breaking with quiet despair. We appealed directly to the High Assembly on Zenith Prime. We appealed to our treaty partners in the SKRYLL hegemony and the Valen Syndicate. And, Vanya asked quietly, though deep down, she already knew the answer. The communications officer pulled up the official incoming responses, projecting their text onto the central display. The SKRYLL hegemony had replied first. Regrettably, our regional defense reserves are fully committed to border patrols along the rim. We cannot risk compromising our own security vectors to intervene in your sector. The Valen Syndicate had replied shortly after. Pursuant to Article 4, Section 9 of the Galactic Trade Accords, military intervention in non-signatory territory presents an unacceptable financial risk to our merchant insurance cartels. We offer our deepest diplomatic sympathies. And the Galactic Council itself had issued a polite, bureaucratic declaration. The High Council has formed an emergency diplomatic committee to debate the legality of the Ravager invasion. A vote on potential economic sanctions will be scheduled during the next quarterly assembly in 90 days. Vanya let out a hollow, bitter laugh. 90 days. Her homeworld had 48 hours before 3,000 barbarian dreadnoughts began raining antimatter warheads onto her cities. And the grandest civilization in the galaxy was scheduling a committee debate. They have abandoned us, Vanya whispered, her voice carrying through the quiet command room. 12,000 years of peaceful trade, joint scientific ventures, and cultural exchange. And when the fire comes to our home, they hide behind contract clauses and legal paperwork. She turned toward the young communications officer. Open the high-gain subspace transceivers, Vanya commanded, her tone turning cold and resolute. Bypass the council relays. Broadcast on all unencrypted emergency frequencies across the entire galaxy. Do not restrict it to council members. Send it to anyone with an antenna. High Matriarch? The officer hesitated. An unencrypted broadcast will reach independent sectors, outer rim scavengers, unregulated rim dwellers, even primitive species who have not yet been integrated into the High Assembly. I do not care, Vanya spat, her claws gripping the edge of the glass console. The civilized galaxy has left us to die. If we are to perish, let the entire universe hear our final words. Send the message. The officer nodded, his hands flying across his control board. The planetary relay array at the top of the spire groaned as it drew its final reserve power, channeling millions of gigawatts into an unencrypted emergency broadcast beam that cut straight through the galactic core. To anyone listening, Vanya spoke directly into the broad-frequency transmitter. Her voice broadcast across thousands of light-years in real time. "This is Supreme Matriarch Vanya of the Lumina. Our fleet is destroyed. Our planetary shield is collapsing. The Ravager horde is at our gates, and our home is hours away from total extinction. We begged our allies for help, and they turned their backs. If there is any soul in this universe who remembers honor, mercy, or justice, hear us. We are dying alone." The broadcast ceased. Silence filled the command spire. Outside, the sky rocked as another salvo of kinetic ordnance detonated against the thinning plasma dome, illuminating the city below in an eerie, bloody crimson flash. For 10 minutes there was nothing. No incoming warp signatures. No responses. Only the cold, static hum of empty space. Then, a quiet chime echoed from the deep-range communications console. The young officer froze. His sensory stalks snapped straight up. "Hi, Matriarch. I have an incoming audio transmission on the wide-spectrum subband. Is it the Ravagers demanding our surrender?" Vanya asked, bracing herself. "No, ma'am," the officer whispered, staring at the telemetry data in confusion. "The signal isn't coming from the local sector. It was routed through an unmapped jump gate near the Orion Arm. The language marker. It's not on the Council registry. Play it," Vanya ordered. The static cleared. A low, crackling voice resonated through the speakers. The accent was flat, rough, and devoid of the melodic tones common among the Council species. Yet it carried an incredible, unyielding weight. "Lumina High Command, this is Admiral James Vance of the Terran Systems Alliance Navy. We received your distress call. Hold the line. We are coming." The channel clicked dead. Vanya stared at the speaker cone. "Terran Systems Alliance? Who are they?" The chief scholar in the room frantically swiped through the galaxy's historical database on his pad, pulling up an obscure entry. "Humanity High Matriarch, a junior member species from the outer Orion Arm. They were admitted to the Council less than 50 years ago. They are categorized as a Class II industrial civilization. They keep to themselves. They have no major grand armies on parade. No planetary superweapons registered on Zenith Prime. A junior species?" The chief engineer scoffed in despair. "They are thousands of light-years away. Even if they possessed a fleet capable of standing against 3,000 Ravager dreadnoughts, it would take them weeks of warp travel to reach us." Vanya looked back up at the darkening, fire-streaked sky above her city. She didn't know who the humans were. She didn't know why they had answered when the great empires had turned away. But as the crimson shield above her homeworld cracked like glass under the merciless alien bombardment, those 5 simple words echoed in her mind. "Hold the line. We are coming." 48 hours passed. The planetary shield over Solara-Prime was no longer a shield. It was a torn, ragged web of failing energy fields. Over 80% of the grid had blown out, leaving vast swathes of the golden capital city exposed to the cold void of low orbit. The Ravager armada had closed in like a swarm of mechanical locusts. Their flagship, a sprawling, jagged 8-kilometer beast of dark iron and crude spikes, named the Blood Maw, slid into position directly above the main planetary spire. Warlord Krell of the Ravagers stood on his iron bridge, his yellow eyes glowing with sadistic pleasure as he looked down at the defenseless city below. "The shield is dead," Krell bellowed, his clawed hands slamming onto his throne. "Charge the incendiary bombardment bays, burn their cities to slag, strip their planetary vaults of every crystal, every scrap of metal, every drop of water. Leave nothing behind but bones." The 3,000 warships of the Ravager fleet began to line up in atmospheric bombardment formation. Their ventral plasma cannons began to pulse with blinding orange energy, aiming directly at the crowded civilian shelters below. Inside the command spire, Matriarch Vanya stood with her hands clasped together, her officers weeping silently around her. The final 4 Lumina frigates had been vaporized 10 minutes prior. There was nothing left to defend them. "High Matriarch," the communications officer whispered quietly, his voice hollow. "It was an honor to serve you." Vanya closed her eyes, preparing for the blinding flash of plasma that would end her species. Suddenly, the sensor console didn't just chime. It shrieked with a deafening, terrifying alert tone that shattered the quiet despair of the room. "Gravimetric anomaly!" the sensor technician screamed, stumbling backward out of his chair. A catastrophic gravimetric rupture in high orbit. Did the Ravagers deploy a black hole warhead? Vanya demanded, snapping her eyes open. "No, High Matriarch," the technician yelled, pointing at the main tactical hologram, which had suddenly flushed bright, brilliant white. "Space is tearing open. Look, outside the Spire's viewport, in the empty void directly behind the 3,000 Ravager warships, the universe split open. It was not the slow, shimmering blue portal of standard Council work drives. It was a brutal, violently torn rift of raw spatial energy. Then came the ships. They did not trickle in small scout formations. They poured out of the spatial rift like an unstoppable tidal wave of solid tungsten and dark iron. 10 ships, 50 ships, 200 ships, 500 ships. Within 90 seconds, over 1,200 colossal, blocky, heavily armored human dreadnoughts dropped out of slipspace, forming a massive, interlocking wall of heavy metal directly behind the Ravager fleet. They were not sleek like the Council ships, nor were they crude like the Ravager vessels. They were brutalist, uncompromising leviathans of war, heavy, thick-hulled battlecruisers bristling with thousands of kinetic turret batteries, automated missile silos, and heavy magnetic railguns that hummed with terrifying white-blue energy. On the bridge of the Blood Maw, Warlord Krell jumped out of his throne, his scales flaring pale green in sheer shock. "What is that? Where did those ships come from?" "Sensors registering human military signatures," his tactical officer shrieked, his claws flying wildly over his controls. "Over 1,200 heavy capital ships. They jumped directly into low orbital space behind us. They're trapping us against the planet's upper atmosphere." Before Krell could process the staggering scale of the sudden human arrival, a single broad-spectrum audio broadcast cut forcefully through every military and civilian channel in the entire system. It was the same calm, unyielding voice that had answered the Lumina distress call 2 days earlier. "Attention Ravager fleet. This is Admiral James Vance of the Terran System's Alliance flagship, UNS Iron Sovereign. You have committed unprovoked war crimes against a non-combatant species. You were warned to leave the system." Krell bared his sharp teeth, his pride overcoming his sudden dread. "Insolent human fools," Krell roared into his comms. "You bring 1,000 ships against 3,000 Ravager war dreadnoughts. We have burned 17 star systems. We will tear your heavy iron hulls apart and turn your crews into feed." On the bridge of the UNS Iron Sovereign, Admiral Vance didn't raise his voice. He didn't offer a dramatic speech. He simply adjusted his cap, looked at his helm officer, and gave a single, quiet command. "All ships, open fire." What followed was not a strategic space battle. It was an absolute, cold-blooded execution. The 1,200 human dreadnoughts fired simultaneously. Space around Solara-Prime turned into a blinding, suffocating storm of kinetic violence. Millions of depleted uranium slugs, accelerated to 20% of light speed by massive magnetic coils, slammed into the flanks of the Ravager fleet. The Ravagers had spent centuries fighting Council species who relied almost exclusively on plasma lances and light energy shields. Their armor was designed to reflect heat and diffuse energy beams. It was completely useless against solid kinetic slugs the size of houses moving at relativistic speeds. The heavy tungsten shells punched directly through the crude iron armor of the Ravager dreadnoughts, tearing through reactor cores, fuel lines, and crew decks before exiting the far side of the ships in massive showers of liquid metal and fire. "Shields ineffective," the tactical officer on the Blood Maw wailed as his ship shuddered violently under a continuous barrage of human kinetic rounds. "Our armor is disintegrating." Forward batteries 3 through 8 are destroyed. They're hitting us with physical momentum. Return fire, Krell screamed, panic completely overriding his rage. Burn them with plasma. The Ravager fleet attempted to turn its massive ships around to engage the human fleet, but the humans had calculated their jump vectors with terrifying precision. Human strike cruisers, equipped with automated close-in weapon systems and swarms of heavy nuclear-tipped torpedoes, darted through the gaps in the clumsy Ravager formation. They fired point-blank salvos into the engine thrusters of the alien dreadnoughts, crippling their mobility before they could even complete a 90-degree turn. Break formation, Krell shrieked as he watched 3 of his heavy siege carriers break in half, their hulls collapsing inward under the unrelenting pressure of human railgun fire. Warp out. Initiate emergency jumps back to the outer sectors. We can't, his navigation officer screamed back, tears of panic streaming down his snout. The humans have deployed heavy gravimetric interdictor cruisers along the entire sector grid. Space is locked down. We can't open a warp channel. Humanity hadn't just come to drive the Ravagers away. They had come to eliminate the threat entirely. For 3 straight hours, the human fleet moved forward in an unbroken, relentless battle line. They fired continuously, reloading their kinetic batteries with mechanical efficiency, closing the distance meter by meter, crushing the trapped Ravager fleet against the upper atmosphere of Solara-Prime. Ravager dreadnoughts, desperate to escape the relentless human fire, tried to plunge into the planet's lower atmosphere, only to be intersected by automated human drop fighters that chased them into the clouds and blew them to pieces. On the planet below, millions of Lumina citizens emerged from their underground shelters. They stood in the streets of their golden cities, staring up at the sky in absolute, awestruck silence. Where they had expected to see their deaths raining down from above, they saw a sweeping wall of human warships completely obliterating the barbarian fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for months. The sky was lit not by burning cities, but by the blinding explosions of 3,000 enemy warships being methodically erased from existence. By the 4th hour, the firing stopped. The silence that fell over the Solaris system was heavy and absolute. 3,000 Ravager warships, the entire frontline military force of the most terrifying barbarian empire in the sector, had been reduced to a vast, drifting cloud of glowing, hollowed-out metallic wreckage floating harmlessly in high orbit. Not a single Ravager warship had escaped. Not a single ship had breached the human line. High Warlord Krell's flagship, the Blood Maw, floated as a dark, lifeless wreck directly above the Lumina capital spire, its weapons cold, its engines dead, its crew captured by human boarding squads who had taken the vessel in less than 20 minutes. Inside the planetary command spire, Supreme Matriarch Vanya stared at her tactical screen. Every single red marker representing the enemy fleet had vanished. In their place stood 1,200 blue markers, the Terran Systems Alliance Navy, sitting quietly in orbital formation, their weapons powered down, holding a silent, protective guard over her homeworld. Vanya's hands trembled violently as she reached for her broad-frequency transmitter. Terran flagship, Vanya stammered, her voice choked with overwhelming emotion. This is Supreme Matriarch Vanya. Do you read me? The channel opened instantly. We read you loud and clear, High Matriarch, Admiral Vance replied. His tone as calm and polite as if he were discussing a trade agreement. Apologies for the noise. We had a bit of traffic to clear out before we could establish a stable landing vector. Vanya let out a ragged breath, tears spilling down her luminescent cheeks. You destroyed them all. In 4 hours. You destroyed an armada that 3 council species couldn't stop. They were a threat to innocent lives, High Matriarch, Vance said simply. Humanity does not tolerate predators who hunt those who cannot defend themselves. Admiral, Vanya whispered, bowing her head deeply toward the visual display. Our planet is saved. 3 billion lives have been spared. Tell me, how can we ever repay you? What do you ask of us? Mineral rights? Territorial leases? Trade monopolies? Whatever humanity demands, the Lumina will grant it without question. There was a short pause on the line. On the visual display, Admiral Vance looked at her with a gentle, humble smile that carried no greed, no arrogance, and no desire for conquest. "High Matriarch," Vance said softly, "we don't want your minerals and we don't want your land. We came here because you called for help when no one else would answer." He stepped closer to his visual console, his expression turning sincere and earnest. "If you truly wish to repay us, then do this. If there ever comes a day when another species is trapped in the dark, weeping for help, and the rest of the galaxy turns its back, do not hesitate. Send your ships. Stand beside them. Teach this galaxy that no one ever has to stand alone." Vanya froze, her heart swelling with a profound, overwhelming respect she had never felt for any council elder or ancient empire. I swear it on the ashes of my ancestors, Admiral," Vanya promised, her voice ringing clear and strong through the room. "The Lumina will never forget this day. As long as our sun shines, we will stand beside humanity." In the weeks that followed, the humans did not pack up their fleet and leave the Lumina to pick up the pieces alone. Instead of deploying military occupiers, the Terran Systems Alliance brought in their civil engineering corps. Within 48 hours of the battle's end, 80 massive human repair freighters and hospital ships entered the Solara system. Human engineers, clad in heavy industrial suits, descended into the planetary atmosphere. Working alongside local Lumina construction crews, they began repairing the shattered planetary shield generators, rebuilding destroyed residential sectors, and deploying heavy atmospheric purifiers to clear the smoke caused by the initial Ravager bombardment. Human medical teams set up field hospitals across every major continent, distributing advanced synthetic medicine, food supplies, and clean water to millions of displaced refugees. Human naval repair tenders remained in high orbit, using their massive automated construction arms to harvest the iron from the drifting Ravager wreckage, smelting the scrap metal down to manufacture structural beams and orbital solar panels for the Lumina's rebuilt space stations. News of the event swept through the Galactic Council on Zenith Prime like a violent shockwave. The elder delegates were stunned into absolute silence. The species they had dismissed as a quiet, insignificant junior member had not only mobilized 1,200 heavy capital ships in less than 48 hours, but they had also completely eradicated the Ravager horde without asking for a single credit in compensation. When Ambassador Sarah Mercer of the Terran Alliance walked into the High Chamber on Zenith Prime 3 weeks later, the atmosphere in the vast hall was entirely different. There were no snide remarks. There were no arrogant chuckles from the upper tiers. As Mercer walked down the central aisle toward the podium, 500 alien delegates stood up from their seats, bowing their heads in deep, profound respect as she passed. High Archon Vrel of the Valen Syndicate stepped down to meet her, his hands trembling slightly as he gestured toward the central platform. "Ambassador Mercer," Vrel said softly, his voice echoing in the silent dome. "The Council has reviewed the full operational logs from the Solara system, your fleet's actions, your logistics, your total victory over the Ravager horde. It is unprecedented in galactic history." He paused, looking at her with a mix of awe and lingering apprehension. "The Lumina High Matriarch sent a formal petition to the Assembly yesterday. She informed us that humanity refused all territorial and monetary compensation for saving her species. She stated that humanity asked only for a pledge of mutual defense and compassion." Vrel bowed his head. We did not understand humanity, Ambassador. We assumed that every species with military strength sought only expansion, dominance, and wealth." Sarah Mercer looked around the vast chamber, at the representatives of 500 species who had spent centuries hiding behind contracts, trade tariffs, and selfish isolationism. "Strength is not measured by how many worlds you conquer, High Archon," Mercer said, her voice calm, clear, and unyielding. "It is measured by how many worlds you protect." She looked up at the highest tiers of the Council. "Humanity learned a long time ago on our homeworld that when you build a house, you don't just build walls for yourself. You build a roof that can shelter your neighbors when the storm comes. We joined this council hoping to find a community of equals. We found an assembly of cowards hiding behind legal papers." She rested her hands on the central podium, her gaze sweeping over every delegate in the room. The Terran Systems Alliance is officially establishing the Orion Defense Compact. It is an open alliance. Any species, whether they are a senior council member or a tiny rim colony, can join. There are no fees. There are no mineral quotas. There is only one rule. If one of us is attacked, all of us answer. She turned toward the Lumina delegation, who sat in the front row, their skins glowing with a bright, proud golden hue. The Lumina have already signed the compact, Mercer concluded softly. The doors are open. The choice is yours. Within 24 hours, over 60 junior member species signed the Orion Defense Compact, breaking away from the Council's passive influence to stand alongside humanity. The galaxy had changed forever. The age of selfish empires and indifferent bureaucrats was collapsing, replaced by a new era built on the unyielding iron, courage, and unconditional compassion of the species that had answered the call when the rest of the universe stayed silent.